All right, let's jump right in. Today we're going to talk about a truly debilitating disease, but also a really surprising connection that researchers are starting to uncover, a hidden link between our minds, our stress levels, and endometriosis.
But before we even get into the science, I think it's important we start with the human side of things. Patients have this phrase for endometriosis. They call it the disease of multiple losses. And that quote, it just hits you, right? It perfectly captures the huge toll it takes on a person's life, their relationships, and just their sense of who they are.
So that brings us to the big question we're tackling today. We know the disease causes a ton of stress, but what if? What if that stress isn't just a side effect? What if it's actually adding fuel to the fire, creating this vicious cycle that makes the disease physically worse? Okay, so to really unpack that question, we first need to get on the same page about the condition itself. Let's just take a moment to understand the sheer scale and impact of endometriosis. So what is it exactly? Well, simply put, endometriosis is this chronic disease where tissue that's like the lining of the uterus starts growing in places it just shouldn't be, like on the ovaries or fallopian tubes. And this misplaced tissue creates a whole cascade of problems, but the big ones are inflammation, really severe pain, and for many, infertility. And the number of people dealing with this, it's kind of staggering. It's estimated that endometriosis affects up to 10% of all women before menopause. Think about that for a second. That's 1 in 10. And if we zoom out and look at the whole world, that number balloons to an estimated 176 million women. So this is not some rare, obscure condition. It's a massive global health issue that's been in the shadows for way too long. And here's the thing you really need to get. The struggle isn't just about the physical pain. I mean, the average time to even get a diagnosis is something like 7 years. Imagine that. All that time, the constant symptoms, the impact on your ability to have children. It all leads to incredibly high levels of stress, anxiety, and depression. It really does touch every single part of a person's life. Okay, so we've got the basics down. Now let's get to the really fascinating part of this story, this idea of a stress endometriosis feedback loop and how our body's own defense systems can kind of get hijacked by the disease. Now, take a look at this because it shows the cycle perfectly. It starts with the endometriosis symptoms, the pain, the infertility, which naturally cause a lot of stress. That stress then triggers hormones and immune cells that create more inflammation. And what does the inflammation do? Well, it makes the symptoms even worse, which, you guessed it, creates even more stress. It just feeds on itself over and over again. But we need to be clear here. Not all stress is the bad guy. There's what scientists call eustress, or good stress. That's like the positive rush you get when you're excited about a challenge. The real problem is distress. That's the chronic, nonstop stress that just wears down your immune system and pours gasoline on that inflammatory fire we just talked about. So how does this work inside the body? Well, it's all run by a system called the HPA axis. Think of it like a chain of command. First, your brain senses a threat. That tells the hypothalamus to send out a chemical signal. That signal goes to the pituitary gland, which sends another signal down to the adrenal glands, telling them release the cortisol, the famous stress hormone. Now, normally, this system is great. It turns on and off. But with chronic distress, it can get stuck in the on position. Okay, so this all sounds like a solid theory, right? But scientists, they need proof. So to really test this idea, they took it to the lab. Let's see what the animal models showed them about this stress connection. The researchers had a very direct and, frankly, a huge question to answer. Can psychological stress actually have a physical, measurable effect on how endometriosis progresses? And the answer they found? A big, clear yes. Absolutely. In their studies on rats, when they exposed the animals to stress, they ended up with physically larger endometrial lesions and more signs of inflammation. This was it, the first real biological evidence linking the two. But that's not even the most interesting part. Not by a long shot. Because what they found next, well, it changed everything. They realized it wasn't just about whether there was stress or not. It was the type of stress that made all the difference. And this is the number that really blew their minds. So they compared one group of rats that had uncontrollable stress with another group that had controllable stress. Basically, they had a little platform they could escape to. And the results? The group that felt like they had some control, their lesions were about 50% smaller. This was huge, a total game changer. It meant that it wasn't about getting rid of stress completely, which is impossible, but about changing the feeling around it. Just having a sense of agency, a feeling of control, had a direct, physical, positive impact on the disease. This just opened up a whole new way of thinking. So, of course, this led them to an even bigger, more hopeful question. If a sense of control can make such a difference, what about the entire environment someone is in? Could creating a better, more positive, more stimulating world actually help heal the body? And that brings us to our final section here, a new path forward. This is where we take all that incredible science and hope from the lab and try to translate it into real action that could help people. The concept they tested is called environmental enrichment. Now, in a lab, that just means things like bigger cages, more friends to interact with, and new toys to explore. It's basically their version of creating a more engaging, less stressful, and happier place to live. And the results? Honestly, they were even more stunning than the last experiment. The rats with endometriosis that lived in this enriched environment saw a 60% reduction in the size of their lesions. Let that sink in. This isn't a drug or a surgery. It's a change in environment, causing a massive physical change in the disease. So the big question is, what does environmental enrichment look like for us, for humans? Obviously, it's not about bigger cages. It's about things we can actually do. Things like building strong social support systems, trying new hobbies, spending time in nature, getting some physical activity, and learning real stress management techniques. It's about building a life that feels more supportive, more engaging, and maybe most importantly, more in your control. And really, this is what it all boils down to. This science seems to be pointing towards a more holistic approach, one that combines the best of clinical care with pain management and these other therapies, like support groups or exercise, things that directly attack that stress feedback loop and give the patient back that powerful sense of control. Which leaves us with one final, really powerful thought to consider. While the world waits for a cure for endometriosis, could it be that changing our environment and learning how we manage our stress within that environment, could that be one of the most powerful and accessible healing tools we have right now? The science is really starting to look like the answer is yes.